Hi everyone, this is Studio X, and in this tutorial you will be learning how to make a anti-gravity 3D scene. We have a real person interacting with some 3D elements that were added in post. So let me show you how to make all of this happen. So first you have to open up your After Effects and get your original footage and trim it to the length that you need. So I already trimmed my video, and next thing you're going to need to do is save the project. So I'm going to go into desktop and just call it Gravity and call this Gravity AE, and I'm just going to save. So in After Effects, go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue, go into the settings and choose QuickTime. In Format Options, choose H.264, hit OK. OK. Go into a folder. I'm just going to go into Gravity and just call it Footage and just hit Save and hit Render. While it's rendering, we are going to open up Cinema 4D and start preparing our scene. So once Cinema 4D is open, I'm going to go into the content browser and find a item that I like that will be in the 3D scene. Once you have all of your elements that you want to be in the scene, make sure they are scaled correctly. So in here I have some gears and they're a little too big. So I'm just gonna go into the coordinates and try to size them accordingly. Once you have all your elements, then let's create a camera and set the resolution. So my video was 1920 by 1080. It was 24 frames a second. And I'm going to click on the camera, that way it's active, so on this little icon here, and I'm going to reset all the parameters except for the Z, and I'm going to reset all the rotation as well. So now my camera is actually pointing just straight towards all of the objects. I'm going to go into my camera settings, and in the object tab I'm going to change the focal length to be 55 because that's what the settings were on my camera when I was shooting. Now it's time to lay out all the objects into your scene. So I'm going to get my pen positioned where I think it looks nice, and I'm definitely going to need to zoom back with the camera because the camera is really close to everything. So I'm just going to move these objects around somewhere into the scene just so they're a little more spread out. Once you have all your objects, now I'm going to make a new background. So to make the background material, just double click in the material tab and let's save the project before we do anything else, and just go into the folder Gravity, and I'm just going to call it Gravity C4D and just hit save. So go into your material, and in the color tab, press these three little dots, and I'm going to choose my footage, QuickTime video, and I'm going to hit open. Then in animation, I'm just going to hit calculate, and it just does all the math. So now I can just overlay it, move the material to my background, and I should be able to see it. So when I hit render, it will show up to where the things happen. So now I am going to position the pen where she touches it with the finger. So I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna make a interactive render region with really low quality, and I'm just going to position it somewhere where it just shows the action with the pen. So it seems like this is the point where she touches the pen, so I'm just going to make a new sphere. I'm going to make the radius pretty small, something like maybe 3 centimeters. And I'm going to position it exactly where her finger is. I'm actually going to make it even smaller. So I'm going to make it 1 centimeter, and this seems like the perfect location for it. Now I'm going to disable my render region, and I'm going to uncheck my camera. That way I can position the pen exactly in that area. And I'm just going to give it a more interesting rotation and just, rotate it in an interesting way. So at this point in time, that's when she touches the pen. So I'm going to go to the sphere, and I'm going to keyframe it here. So this is where her finger ends up being. I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to go just a couple of frames, maybe like 5 frames or so, and see that this is where her finger is before. So I'm just going to position the sphere a little further back and a little to the right, to the left, because that's where it was before, and hit keyframe. And let me just double check that that's where her finger is. So even a little more left, but other than that, that should be the general area. So I'm just gonna press it here and hit keyframe. So if I play it, that's kind of how her finger goes. So now I'm gonna right click on my sphere, go into Cinema 4D tags, compositing, and I'm just gonna uncheck scene by camera, and that way when I'm rendering, the sphere doesn't actually show up in the scene. So now what we need to do is save our project, and we need to turn on every object and make it dynamic. And before we do that, we're gonna go into edit and go to project settings, and under the dynamics we're going to make gravity 0, because everything is going to be in anti-gravity and floating around. So now we can go into each object, so machine screw, go into simulation tags, rigid body, and now this is where the fun happens. So click on the custom initial velocity under the collision tab, or actually the dynamics tab here, and just click on custom initial velocity and just pull up these rotations. So now when you hit play, you can see things are just spinning like they're in space. And don't crank up these numbers too much, because you don't want them going too fast. So I'm just gonna make these, pretty small numbers, just so things are floating around. And I'm also going to rotate all these objects randomly before all those other things, just so they're kind of, floating around randomly, like these watch gears and all those objects. And I'm just going to reposition these watch gears and make them even smaller. So you can just copy by holding command. You can copy the dynamics tag to other objects and just change the settings a little bit, just so they're spinning in different directions. And do that for all of the objects. And don't forget to save your project always. So now that we have all these objects spinning around, we're going to make sure that the ball touches the pen when it moves. So over here, in this point in time, we are going to make sure that the pen is actually rotated in a way that it's being touched by this sphere over here. So I'm just going to move it a little bit over, and now I'm going to right click on the sphere, go into simulation tags, and go into collider body, and save the project and hit play, and make sure that it actually interacts with the pen. So as you can see, nothing happened with the pen here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a cylinder, and I'm going to drop it right into the pen, and then take all the pen items and right click on them and go into group objects and throw them inside of this cylinder. Now I'm going to take the cylinder and zero out all these values, and I'm going to go into the radius and make it a lot smaller. So I need to zero out all the values over here as well. There we go. And just make it match up to the null and zero out all these values as well. And now just try to make the size of the actual cylinder kind of match up with the size of the pen, or whatever object you're using in this case. I'm using a pen. So now that it's pretty close, you can take this dynamics tab and put it onto the actual cylinder. So now you can see it's spinning around. And I'm gonna need to reposition it back so that it can interact with the sphere. So now let's go into our camera and see where things go. So, and just try to position it in an interesting way so that when things interact, they happen in an interesting way. In the friction tab for the pen, I'm going to make it 5%, and I'm just going to hit play and see how my simulation looks. And just play around with the settings and just try to match it up in a nice way. So I can see that the pushing is very, very intense. So I'm going to go into my sphere and just bring it forward a lot more before it pushes. Just so when it does push, it's a lot less intense. I'm also going to slow down these keyframes, and I'm just gonna look at the perspective here. Perfect. That looks great. So now it's time to light up the scene. Because I know exactly where the light was located when I was shooting, it will be a lot easier for me to do that. So I'm just going to make an area light. And it was rectangular. And it was just slightly bigger than the camera. Actually, it wasn't as big as this. So I'm just going to make it this size, and I'm just gonna move it back here, and it was around here, and it was positioned right about like that. So that was about where my light was, and you can also tell by the shadows on the actress. So it was a little bit higher up, and it was pointed slightly down. So it was a pretty warm tone, so I'm going to double click on this and just make it slightly warmer. And in the shadows, I'm going to make it an area shadow. So now I'm just going to hit save and make sure I don't see any of the elements I don't actually need to see. And I'm going to hit render and see how that looks. So it's not looking too interesting right now. And in order to fix that problem, we are going to go into the physical render and we're gonna hit render and take a look and see if anything looks any better. We are still basically getting no reflections and nothing's looking interesting or nice. So in order to do that, we are going to make a sky, and we are going to put a HDR image of a studio just to make some interesting reflections in the scene. So I'm just going to go HDRI. You can find some pictures on Google Images just by typing in studio light HDRI or HDRI scene studio HDRI, but find something similar to this and you'll be fine. Now once again I'm going to right click on it and go into Cinema 4D tags, compositing, and make sure that it's not seen by camera. So now all the elements are showing up here, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move them in the Z space a little bit differently because they're all basically on one plane currently. So I'm just gonna go and just move them forward a bit and just make them spaced out, you know, a lot better. There we go. Put some objects like really in front of the camera, while others are a lot further back, just to create a more interesting space. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I can render a depth pass. So I'm going to click on my camera and bring in the depth here. And I'm going to bring it to the very back element, and that's basically where the back is going to be. So that seems about alright. So it's about 100. There we go. And in the details tab, I'm gonna check on depth of field map frontal blur, and I'm gonna make that 100. So that way we get all of that. So save project, and in my render settings I'm going to check multipass, and I'm going to enable depth, and I'm also going to enable motion vector. Perfect. Now in my output settings I'm going to make sure it's all frames. I'm gonna give it a frame rate of 30, just so we're getting all these, every single frame in there. I'm gonna uncheck save regular image, and I'm gonna make this open EXR. And in my gravity folder, I'm just gonna make a export folder, and I'm going to call this multipass. Before we render, we have to make sure that the background is also not seen. So I'm going to go into compositing and uncheck seen by camera. So now when you hit render, you basically just get it on a empty background. So in the render settings, in the save, make sure alpha channel is selected. So now I'm going to hit save and render, and I'll see you guys in After Effects. Okay, so now we are done rendering, so let's go back into After Effects and let's import our sequence. So go to the folder where you saved your sequence. So in my export, multipass, and make sure open EXR sequence is selected, and just hit open. Now you can just drag it on top, and there you go, it appears right on top. So let's make sure that it is aligned correctly. So it looks like the timing is a little bit off. So let's make it so that when she taps, there we go. It also seems like the scale is a little bit off, so I'm just gonna scale this up just so it matches right here. And there we go. And I'm just gonna position it a little bit lower as well. So there we go. And just shift it a couple of pixels over. Perfect. So that is looking great. So now what I am gonna do is I'm just gonna shift over the size so it's here. Then I'm gonna copy and paste this right here. And I'm just gonna go into composition or layer, pre-compose, move all attributes into a new composition, and I'm just gonna call this depth and just hit OK. So now I'm gonna go into this layer right here and click on this, go into effect, 3D channel, extractor, and I'm just going to click on this overall area, and under layers I'm going to select depth, and I'm going to hit OK, and that basically brings in the depth pass. So there it is. I'm just going to hide it for now, and I'm going to copy and paste and do the exact same thing. So layer, pre-compose, move all attributes, and I'm going to call this motion. And I'm going to go into this as well and go into effect, extractor, and this time I'm going to choose motion vector, and I'm going to hit OK. So now we have a depth pass and a motion pass basically extracted from this beauty layer that we have here. So I'm going to go and make a new layer, adjustment layer, and call this motion blur. And I'm going to make sure that this is above our beauty and below our motion, below our other layers here. And I'm going to go into effect, revision plugins, real smart motion blur pro vectors, and I'm going to choose my motion layer here. And basically what that does, if I zoom in, it brings in motion blur into the layers. Next thing we're going to do is go into layer and make another adjustment layer, and I'm going to call this DOF for depth of field, and I have a plugin right here called Frischluft depth of field, and you basically select your depth layer, depth pass, and I'm going to go into my sharp zone and increase the radius, and I can just select the depth on the pen right here. So now it basically focuses on the pen, and so now if I go into normal blur, you can see that it makes everything else blurred out. So if I make it like 25, you can see that it makes it in focus compared to everything else. So that is great for doing very nice depth of field. So I'll make it something like 5 or 3 for now. So basically I'm gonna go just to the point when she touches the pen and it bounces off. So when she touches the pen, I'm gonna keyframe the radius and the focal point, and I'm just gonna select the focal point on the pen once again, and then I'm just gonna go forward in time to when the pen is flying through, and I'm gonna select the depth on the pen again now here, which changes, and I'm going to bring up the radius to something like 30. So now if I actually look at the composition now, you'll see that the focus is going to be on the pen and maybe also on the bolt in the front compared to everything else. Yep, so there we go. I might actually disable the motion blur. Actually, no, the motion blur looks pretty good. Actually, no. But yeah, there's a lot of settings you can play with. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to hit U just so I can see the keyframes. And I'm going to select these keyframes, and I'm going to right click and go to Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease. So now that we have the scene here, we are going to need to do some color correction. So I'm just going to go to the overall scene right here where everything is just flying around, and I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I'm going to call this CC for color correction, and I'm just going to bring it to above the depth of field. I'm going to turn that off for now. I'm going to go into my multipass, my beauty actually, but basically the layer with all of these, and I'm going to go into levels. So now I'm going to try to match the color of this with the actual scene. So you can do that by going into the individual red, green, and blue channels to try to match it. So if I go into red, you can see the contrast ratio with everything. So you can see there's a lot of red in here because there's a warm light. So you're getting some really bright highlights here. While on this pen, everything is kind of very not intense. So, and you can just play with the levels to match that look. So I'm gonna try to match it pretty close. Let's see. That looks pretty good. So basically, as if this picture was black and white, you basically have to try to match it. And every color you go into changes. So you can see there's a lot less green in this scene. So I can basically decrease the intensity of the green. And let's go into the blue and try to match the blue. So there's even less blue. So I'm just gonna try to match this the best I can. There we go. So now let's go and take a look. Yeah, so that is looking way better than it was before. So this was before and this is after. So you can see now it actually fits into the scene as if it was actually pretty much there. So now we can actually go into our color correction, and for this I'm going to use Magic Bullet Looks. So I'm just going to type in Looks and apply the Magic Bullet Looks effect and apply a couple of my favorite filters that I like applying. So first of all, I'm going to apply a lens vignette as well as a lens distortion, chromatic aberration, shadows and highlights. So that should be good. Let's pull up some shadows. Let's get our lens vignette and just bring it out. For lens distortion, I'm going to go negative. That way it's just flattening the corners of the image. So maybe like -4 or -3.6. You can see the effect that it does here. And for chromatic aberration, I'm just going to bring some values just to give it more of a sci-fi look. Then I'm going to go into the two-strip process and play with the sensitivity, see what we could do. Yeah, I don't really like it too much, so we're gonna get rid of that. And maybe apply a mojo or a duotone. Let's turn this off and play with this. So that's actually looking kind of nice. I'm gonna turn that off for now and go to mojo. I'm also gonna go into the curves and bring up the shadows a little more. There we go. That is looking nice. Now I'm gonna add a flare in here as well. So I'm just gonna make a light. Put it here in the corner. And I'm gonna make a layer new null object. And I'm basically gonna pre-compose all of this. So layer, pre-compose, call this final, and attach the light and the final to this. And I'm just gonna basically scale it in over time. So I'm gonna do like 104 at the end. And we're also gonna rotate it slightly. So like 2 degrees. 1.5. 2, and make the scale 105. Yep, it looks pretty good. Actually, rotate it even more. You could rotate it 3 or 4 because you're gonna put an anamorphic crop. So let's throw in a anamorphic crop in here. You can just find a crop for it online or crop it yourself by just adding black bars to the top or bottom. There we go. And I'm also gonna move the position of this as well. I'm gonna bring it up so you can actually see the bolt. So I'm gonna rotate it in the other direction. So -4 or -3. And there we go. So now let's add a lens flare. And let's move the light down a little bit more and just bring it out in Z space. So we're getting some nicer parallax here. And layer, new solid, call it flare. Save and go to Effect, Video Copilot, Optical Flares. And I'm just gonna choose a nice looking sci-fi flare. Tracker looks pretty good. And I'm gonna choose light source, track lights. There we go. And I'm just gonna choose a blending mode screen. So now you can see you're getting a nice, interesting dynamic scene. So now we're gonna get a better blur quality. So I'm gonna go into my adjustment layer here of depth of field, and in the iris settings I'm gonna go into my iris and set it to 9 blades, and round them by 0.6, so I'm getting more jagged edges here. And that's because on the real lens that I shot, it has 9 blades, and it's an Zeiss lens, so you can see it pretty nicely. So, and that's why I put it on there. So that is looking really good. So now we have the final result here, and it's looking amazing. So I hope this tutorial was helpful and you learned some new tricks. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you're new to this channel. I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.